She thought she'd found her forever in a man who quoted scripture more beautifully than any poet. But by sundown on their wedding day, she was staring into the face of someone she barely recognized, someone who made her question every moment that led her to the altar. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that even your closest friends couldn't convince you otherwise? Have you ever wanted something so badly, love, safety, purpose, that you ignored the quiet warnings in your gut just to believe it was finally your turn for happiness? Mara Ellington did. And it nearly cost her everything. She was 33, patient, God-fearing, and tired of chasing hollow connections. When she met Pastor Nate, it felt divine. He wasn't loud or overbearing. He was calm, principled, and spoke like he had the universe on speed dial. But 24 hours into what should have been the start of a lifelong covenant, Mara was already filing to erase his name from her future. Why would a newlywed walk away the morning after tying the knot? What did she see that shattered the illusion so violently? She ran, not walked, from her own honeymoon. Stay with me. Because this isn't a story about cold feet or a lover's quarrel. This is about a man who wore the cloak of holiness to hide a truth so sickening, it triggered a federal manhunt across state lines. And the woman whose instincts saved her life before she fully understood what she was being saved from. If you've ever questioned the mask someone wore around you, or barely escaped a relationship you couldn't explain, drop a comment below. Share your story, or simply write, "I understand." Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories like these hit close to home. Your voice matters, and someone reading it might just need the strength you found. Mara Ellington wasn't the kind of woman who wore her heartbreaks on her sleeve. Raised in a modest brick home on the quiet edges of Augusta, Georgia, she learned early on that love was a gamble, and she had lost more times than she cared to count. Her father, a Vietnam-era military man turned mechanic, passed when Mara was 16. Her mother, a woman of quiet grit, kept the family afloat working 2 jobs. Mara didn't grow up with much, but she had enough books, enough hope, and just enough guidance to believe that faith could fix what the world broke. By the time she was in her 30s, Mara had created a name for herself. She was that counselor at Jefferson High who remembered every student's name, who left granola bars on her desk for kids who skipped breakfast, who stayed after hours because a teen's tears couldn't wait until Monday. Her voice was calming. Her eyes warm. She was the kind of woman people trusted. But her personal life told a different story. Mara had tried love, genuinely, earnestly. She'd been engaged once, to a man named Calvin who ended things after 2 years, citing emotional incompatibility. Before him, there were others. Flings. Fleeting romances. Men who loved the idea of her more than the responsibility of loving her right. By 33, she was done swiping through profiles that felt like job interviews. She wanted something deeper. Rooted, anchored. Something that didn't vanish the moment vulnerability entered the room. Her prayers became more specific. God, send me someone who knows you. Not just in name, but in action. Someone who walks with purpose. A man who's already whole, not someone I have to fix. That's when Nathaniel, Nate Harrow entered her life. He wasn't flashy. He didn't speak in sweeping metaphors or promise the moon. But there was something arresting about his presence. The first time they met at the church's singles ministry brunch, he'd quoted Corinthians while buttering a biscuit, and Mara had laughed, not at the scripture, but at the casual way he wore it. He spoke with conviction but without judgment. He looked her in the eyes, not at her body, not over her shoulder, but right into her. And when he asked what she prayed for, it didn't feel like a pickup line. It felt like he was taking notes. Nate pastored a small congregation in Selwyn Falls, about 40 minutes from Augusta. It wasn't a megachurch with fog machines and LED screens. It was a whitewashed wooden chapel tucked beside a cemetery, quiet and removed from the noise of city life. His sermons weren't broadcasted through massive sound systems but streamed quietly online. He had a gentle cadence, the kind that made people lean in. Mara was enthralled. Their courtship was fast, but it never felt rushed. Nate didn't believe in dating for the sake of dating. Courtship, he told her, is preparation for covenant. They met on Sundays, sometimes Thursdays. He brought her flowers, prayed before meals, and read scripture with her in the park. When she texted late at night, he always responded in the morning with a gentle reminder, "I guard my evenings for God." That discipline impressed her. She admired his boundaries. No late-night sleepovers. No crossing lines. Not even a kiss until month 3. He spoke often about purity and honor, how the physical should never outweigh the spiritual. To Mara, it wasn't repression. It was respect. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. Layla, her best friend since college, was cautious from the start. Layla had seen Mara love hard, and lose harder. She wasn't suspicious of Nate's faith, but she was wary of his secrecy. "You've never seen his house?" Layla asked one afternoon over iced coffee. "He's renovating it," Mara said without blinking. "He showed me pictures. It's small but cozy. And his congregation? You've never met a single member. He says they're rebuilding." There was a schism. Some kind of internal conflict. Layla raised an eyebrow. "Mara, it's been 6 months. You don't think that's strange?" Mara didn't. Not then. Nate had an answer for everything. Smooth. Calm. Practiced. She trusted his words the way one might trust a lighthouse in fog. Steady. Anchored. Safe. When he proposed, it wasn't elaborate. No ring hidden in champagne, no flash mob. Just a picnic, a small Bible, and a simple question, "Will you walk with me into forever?" She said yes without hesitation. The wedding was scheduled within 2 months. Mara wanted simple. Nate wanted swift. They planned an outdoor ceremony behind the church with just a few friends and family. Nate claimed his own circle couldn't make it, some out of state, others displaced spiritually. That didn't bother her. She had enough love to fill the pews herself. The night before the wedding, Layla pulled her aside. "I'm only saying this once," she whispered. "If something feels off tomorrow, no matter how small, don't ignore it. You always tell your students to trust their gut. Take your own advice." Mara smiled and kissed her cheek. "I know what I'm doing." But the warning lingered. The wedding day came like a soft breeze. Sunlight filtering through magnolia trees, vows whispered beneath a makeshift arch, Mara's mother crying softly in the front row. Nate looked pristine in a gray suit, his hand steady as he held hers. There was no trembling, no hesitation. Only promise. He spoke of unity, divine timing, and how the past held no dominion over the present. "When 2 souls become one," he said, "God wipes away all former things." By the time they kissed, Mara felt like every unanswered prayer had finally found its reply. But that feeling wouldn't last. What Mara didn't know, what no one in attendance could have known, was that the man she had just vowed her life to had a past far more complex, and far more calculated, than anything her spirit could have discerned in that moment. It started with a smudge of lipstick. A delay. A lie about a dying phone. And before 24 hours had passed, the illusion of her dream had collapsed into a silence so deafening, it would take months to fully escape. Mara Ellington awoke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that soothes you back to sleep. But the thick, echoing kind. The kind that suggests someone has left, taken something with them, and never plans to return. It was the morning after her wedding. She'd fallen asleep in the small cabin Nate had reserved for their wedding night. It was rustic but charming, tucked near a lake about 20 minutes outside Augusta. Candlelit, cozy. No Wi-Fi. Just the 2 of them, and the promises they made. Only now, the sheets beside her were cool. The cabin door slightly ajar. Nate's phone was gone. His suit jacket too. Mara sat up, heart beginning to thud with an eerie disquiet. She called his name once. Then twice. No answer. By noon, she was calling his number. Straight to voicemail. By sunset, she called the police. To the 911 dispatcher, she sounded calm. Measured. Like someone used to managing crises. My husband is missing, she said. It's been over 12 hours. We just got married yesterday. Something's wrong. Deputies arrived within the hour. They canvassed the area, checked for signs of forced entry or a struggle. Nothing. A fishing dock worker nearby claimed he saw a man around 5 a.m. walking briskly through the woods, carrying a small duffel bag. Didn't wave. Just disappeared into the fog, he said. No security footage. No tire tracks in the gravel. No helpful fingerprints. Just an empty cabin, a worried bride, and a husband who seemed to vanish off the face of the earth. But then, 3 days later, everything changed. The sheriff's office received a tip from a motel employee in Jasper County. A man had checked in under the name Marcus Hale. Paid in cash. Didn't say much. But the desk clerk noticed something odd. He prayed aloud before entering the room. Quoted scripture softly under his breath. It unsettled her. She Googled, Pastor, Georgia, missing, and Nate's face popped up. Same sharp jawline. Same deep-set eyes. Deputies raided the room within hours, but it was empty. Sheets stripped. Window unlocked. A Gideon Bible left on the nightstand with a single underlined verse, "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." Luke 8:17. But that wasn't the chilling part. Inside the motel dumpster, investigators found a burned briefcase, half melted and still smoldering. Inside it, several partially destroyed documents, including a forged marriage license dated 2 years prior, multiple IDs with Nate's face under different names, a Texas driver's license for Aaron Booth, a business card for a woman named Delilah Garner, listed as wife and co-owner, Trinity Services, Houston. Mara was brought in for questioning. Detectives didn't believe she was involved. Her anguish was real. But they needed answers. Who was Nate Harrow? Mara shook her head, stunned. I never heard of Texas. He told me his family was estranged. I never met a single one of them. He said he was called to be a shepherd, not to carry his past. The lead detective, Dana Rourke, pressed further. Did you ever see him with money? Large sums? No, Mara replied. He was frugal. Said he tithed regularly and gave to missions. But forensic banking data told a different story. Over the last 6 months, Nate had moved nearly $312,000 between various accounts under names like Aaron Booth, Lionel Davis, and Jameson Kirk. The trail led to 4 different states, and at least 3 women identified themselves as his spouse. All legally married. All abandoned. Delilah Garner, the woman on the Texas business card, was the most vocal. He said God sent me to him, she told a Houston station. He said we were building a ministry together. We even bought land. Then, poof. Gone. He left me 6 figures in debt and no explanation. Her voice cracked on air. The media dubbed him the prophet ghost. A man who disappeared into thin air, quoting scripture as he left broken hearts, financial ruin, and legal chaos behind. But what happened next turned the story from scandal to nightmare. 2 weeks after Mara's wedding, a body was discovered by hikers near the Satilla River. It was buried shallowly beneath sand and brush. Decomposition had set in, but dental records confirmed the identity. It was Miriam Harrow, Nate's first wife, reported missing 7 years prior in North Carolina. The missing persons case had gone cold. Miriam was presumed to have walked out after a domestic dispute. But now her remains were found, along with a rosary, and a burned journal with partially legible entries. He says God speaks through him. But sometimes, it feels more like control. I fear what he'll do if I ever leave. I see it in his eyes. He doesn't want a wife, he wants a witness. If I go missing, please know I didn't run. Nate Harrow's real name, investigators learned, was Kenneth Joel Harper. Born in Kentucky. Multiple aliases. No permanent address since 2011. A transient preacher with an uncanny ability to mirror the beliefs of others and mold his identity to their spiritual needs. Police issued a nationwide warrant for Kenneth Harper. Charged with bigamy, fraud, identity theft, and now suspicion of murder. Back in Augusta, Mara's life unraveled. Reporters camped outside her home. Tabloids ran headlines like, Bride of the Ghost Pastor, and Holy Matrimony or Holy Deception. Strangers online called her clueless, desperate, a woman who wanted a fairy tale so badly she ignored the red flags waving like wildfire. But Mara had nothing to hide. She voluntarily surrendered all emails, text messages, and personal journals to authorities. She even assisted in building a timeline of Nate's travels, based on the scriptures he referenced during their conversations. You don't forget the verses someone prays over you, she told Detective Rourke. Each one was like a breadcrumb. It helped. Using those verses and date stamps, investigators tracked Kenneth's movements across 9 states in 10 years, uncovering at least 5 other women who claimed to be engaged, betrothed, or spiritually married to him. Each time, he vanished just before legal union, or just after securing access to bank accounts or property deeds. But Miriam's death changed the stakes. This wasn't just fraud. This was predatory. Calculated. And possibly homicidal. A break came from an unexpected source. A former associate, an ex-prison chaplain from Tennessee, recognized Kenneth's mugshot on TV. I knew him as Brother Jonah, he told the FBI. He led weekly services. Said he was redeemed after time in federal prison for wire fraud. He said God called him to shepherd broken men. I believed him. Now, he was helping authorities reconstruct Kenneth's prison timeline. Meanwhile, the public devoured the story. Netflix producers called Mara's lawyer. Podcast hosts speculated about cult-like behavior. Conspiracy theorists claimed Kenneth was part of a secret religious syndicate. But the truth was far simpler, and darker. He wasn't running a cult. He was running from consequence. Using faith as both shield and weapon. Grooming his victims not with charm, but with scripture. Preying on belief, not lust. And Mara Ellington had almost become his next casualty. The man who once called himself Kenneth Joel Harper, known to some as Nate Harrow, and to others only as the Prophet Ghost, was finally found not by force or firepower, but by a food pantry barcode. It was nearly 4 months after Miriam Harper's body was recovered. By then, Kenneth had slipped into the shadows of America, another ghost in a country that had stopped looking. But in Kansas City, inside a modest church-run warehouse where the shelves held cans and compassion, someone noticed a man who didn't quite fit. He called himself Pastor Reuben. No ID. No address. Always cash. He quoted scripture at checkout, invoked revelation over every dropped box, and warned the staff to avoid phones. They were portals, he claimed, for demonic frequencies. But it wasn't the paranoia that got him caught. It was the memory of a manager, a man who never forgot faces from true crime documentaries. One reverse image search later, the warehouse became the trap. The next morning, the FBI arrived quietly. No sirens. No struggle. They walked through the pantry's double doors and found Kenneth Joel Harper kneeling beside a widow, clutching her hands in prayer. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just looked up, eyes glassy, face calm, as if he'd known this moment was predestined. As if the handcuffs were another form of worship. And so, the prophet ghost was arrested. When extradited back to Georgia, the true weight of his past collapsed on his shoulders like a cathedral coming down in flames. The charges were staggering. Second-degree murder for the death of Miriam Harper. Multiple counts of bigamy. Fraud. Identity theft. Forgery. Obstruction. Wire fraud. Racketeering. Even the disposal of human remains without lawful authority. Bail. Denied. He had no identity that could be trusted, and too many that could run. The courtroom swelled with bodies and tension on the day of his arraignment. Victims came. Journalists came. Mara Ellington sat in silence, her face drained of warmth. Delilah Garner, flown in from Texas, gripped a rosary tight enough to split the beads. The public leaned forward as he stepped through the courtroom doors, dressed in a suit 2 sizes too big and a serenity that chilled the air. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a preacher who'd lost his church. And then came the defense, bold, arrogant, media savvy. They didn't deny he'd lived under aliases. They didn't deny the marriages, the lies, the moving state to state with a Bible and a new backstory. What they denied was the relevance. The man on trial, they argued, was not Kenneth Joel Harper. He was Nate Harrow, born again in the grace of God. The sins of the past had been washed clean by divine blood. They weren't prosecuting a criminal. They were persecuting a prophet. But the prosecution wasn't moved by salvation stories. They came armed with evidence. Phone records. Bank transfers. GPS logs. Photos of Miriam's partially decomposed body. A journal, scorched but salvageable, with writing in Harper's own hand. Women who sobbed through testimony as they described how he seduced them with scripture and stole their savings, their security, their minds. 5 different states. 5 broken women. 5 fake marriages. And 1 corpse in the ground. The jury hadn't even been selected, and the media was already calling it the trial of the decade. Outside the courthouse, signs lined the sidewalk. Some demanded justice. Others called it a witch hunt. The nation split in 2, those who saw a monster in clerical disguise, and those who saw a man crucified by his own past. Then, a twist. She came forward unannounced. A woman named Daria McKelvey. Not a lover. Not a victim. She was his sister. She hadn't seen Kenneth in years. Not since he'd skipped their mother's funeral and vanished into the backwoods with a Bible and a bus ticket. But she knew who he used to be. And more importantly, what he'd become. She spoke of seizures in his teens, visions after a car crash, the slow spiral from theology to delusion. He once told her he saw numbers in the clouds and angels in the static of his television. But after 2008, he began to speak only in prophecy. He believed he had been chosen. That his pain was a message. That his marriages were divine assignments. Her testimony cracked the case wide open. The defense saw a window. And seized it. They pivoted. This wasn't fraud, they claimed. This was delusion. The mind of a prophet, yes, but one broken by trauma, epilepsy, and divine confusion. He hadn't committed murder. He'd followed divine instructions, however warped. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. It failed. The court's own doctor took the stand and dismantled the insanity plea in 2 sentences. He's not insane, he said. He's manipulative. He knows exactly what he's doing. He uses God the way a ventriloquist uses a dummy. And the dummy always says what he needs it to. Then came the final blow. Cell Tower Records placed his burner phone near the Satilla River, just 800 feet from where Miriam's body was buried, on the exact night she disappeared. Forensic analysis found microscopic blood traces on Harper's camping gear. The pattern wasn't accidental. It was ritualistic. The prophet ghost had run out of miracles. The media swarmed. Netflix acquired the story rights. Mara Ellington signed off on a project called Holy Ghosted, My Marriage to a Phantom. The nation devoured every detail. Talk shows debated the theological ethics of romantic manipulation. Twitter lit up with hashtags, hashtag Justice for Miriam, hashtag Prophet Ghost, hashtag God didn't he tell you to kill her. As jury selection began, one truth became unavoidable: behind every sermon, every smile, every scripture-laced seduction, there was a man. And that man was finally standing on the edge of judgment. The trial was coming. And the truth was waiting. It began on a Monday morning under a sky so still it felt staged, like even the weather was holding its breath. Courtroom 6A at the Fulton County Superior Court became ground zero. Spectators queued before sunrise. Seats were claimed, not by those curious, but by those obsessed. The prophet ghost was finally on trial. The opening statements set the tone. The prosecution opened with a photograph. Not of Kenneth. Not of Miriam. But of a riverbank. Mud-stained. Still. And there, under the dim lighting of an overcast sky, the shape of a tarp, and the tip of a woman's finger. The image sucked the oxygen out of the room. They told the jury they would prove Kenneth Joel Harper wasn't just a con man who married and discarded women like expired scripture, but that he orchestrated Miriam Harper's death with premeditation, spiritual coercion, and cold calculation. Then came the defense. They painted a portrait of a misunderstood man. A messenger with untreated temporal lobe epilepsy, PTSD, and dissociative identity traits. A man who spent years constructing theological frameworks because the real world had failed him. They would argue diminished capacity. They would argue spiritual mania. But mostly, they would argue doubt. And then, came the trial. The testimonies came like tidal waves. First, a forensic pathologist who detailed the condition of Miriam's remains. No clear blunt force trauma. No bullet. No stab wounds. But massive internal hemorrhaging. Broken hyoid. They proposed strangulation, manual, slow, controlled. The kind where the victim looks into the eyes of their killer until breath is memory. Then Delilah Garner took the stand. Her hands shook. Her voice broke on the third sentence. She spoke not of murder, but of seduction. Of how Kenneth had written daily devotionals that were actually confessions, how he'd convinced her God had opened a door between their souls. How he asked her to send photos, then bank details, then finally, to uproot her life and move to Georgia. The jury leaned forward as she described her first and only in-person meeting with Kenneth. It was in a motel. He brought communion wine. He said their union would be outside man's law, but under God's gaze. Then he disappeared the next morning with her credit cards and her car. The courtroom didn't breathe. The defense attempted to strike it from the record. It failed. Next came FBI tech analysts. Screens lit up with digital trails, texts sent to Miriam promising eternal unity. Passwords traced to Kenneth's accounts. A private chat where he wrote, "She is the offering. Through her blood, I will be cleansed." Screenshots flashed. Gasps followed. But it was Daria McKelvey, Kenneth's sister, who brought the gavel down. Her testimony stretched 2 full hours. She wept as she described their childhood. Their mother's beatings. Kenneth's obsession with resurrection stories. The time he buried her childhood dolls in the backyard and prayed over them for days. His refusal to attend therapy. His belief that every woman he met was a vessel. And finally, the moment he called her 6 months before Miriam's death and whispered, "This time, the spirit won't return to the body. She'll stay gone." Cross-examination tried to tear her down. She held steady. The jury didn't blink. But perhaps the most damning moment came during the second week, when the prosecution played the jailhouse phone call. It was between Kenneth and an unknown woman, likely another spiritual devotee. In it, he speaks calmly. "They're trying to say I killed her, but you know how offerings work. You don't kill a lamb. You release it." Silence followed. "Then, I didn't murder. I obeyed." The courtroom turned to stone. The defense scrambled. They brought in their own experts. Neurologists, trauma therapists, theologians. They tried to thread a needle between mental illness and divine confusion. They played old videos of Kenneth preaching to the homeless, quoting Psalms with passion. They insisted this wasn't premeditated murder, it was spiritual psychosis. But no expert could explain the shovel found in his storage unit. No one could explain the passport applications under fake names. No one could explain why, just days after Miriam's disappearance, Kenneth had Googled, "How long before a body stops floating in freshwater?" And then, after 4 weeks, closing arguments arrived like final prayers. The prosecution delivered theirs with ice in their voice. He did not kill in the name of God. He killed to rid himself of a wife who was no longer obedient, no longer useful, no longer profitable. And he used God's name to cover the stench. The defense ended with desperation. What if this was confusion? What if he truly believed? We don't convict prophets. We treat them. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the 4th, the forewoman handed the bailiff a folded note. The judge unfolded it. "Read it." Looked up at Kenneth Harper, calm, smiling, a man ready for martyrdom. The verdict, guilty. On all counts. Murder. Fraud. Bigamy. Identity theft. Abuse of a corpse. Financial crimes. Every alias, every deception, laid bare and buried under judgment. The sentence. Life without parole. Gasps. Tears. Outside, reporters tripped over each other in the rush to break the news. Twitter lit up. Candlelight vigils were held for Miriam. Documentaries launched within weeks. A TikTok filter emerged using Kenneth's courtroom sketch, with the caption, "Would you fall for the prophet ghost?" And inside that cold cell where the bars echoed more than any sermon ever did, Kenneth Joel Harper still preached. Not to crowds. Not to women. But to himself. He claimed the world had crucified another chosen one. But no one was listening anymore. If this story moved you, if it left you speechless, aching, or questioning the darkness people can hide behind a smile, don't just scroll past. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the truth we dare to tell. Like this video if your heart felt even a whisper of the pain shared here. And most importantly, share it. Because someone out there needs to hear this. And maybe, just maybe, it'll make them look a little closer before it's too late.